it's probably a little loud for you guys. But those of you that are here, those of you that are online, we welcome you. If you'll stand and sing with us. Have a great Sunday, guys.
Ring the bells, this time I mean it. Bid the hatred fare thee well. Give back the pieces of my Jesus. Take your counterfeit to hell. Bang the drums, this means a war, not the kind you're waiting for. We say mercy wasn't rationed here. That's what we're fighting for.
If there is love in war, then what the hell is loving even for? We can sing it loud enough. We'll keep on adding voices up.
Ring the bells, ring the bells, ring the bells, ring the bells. Move your feet, you tiny people. You've been hiding for too long behind your statues and your steeples. Does that hit too close to home? I've got faith to move a mountain and to watch that mountain move. Time for words to fall like thunder, sound of justice breaking through.
Loving for, then what the hell is loving even for? The world laughs and the martyrs sing, but love break through the Calvary.
Ring the bells, ring the bells, ring the bells, ring the bells. Call me boy instead of son, and I ain't the only one in the throne room of a kingdom where I found that I belong. I ain't scared to face the fortress, I have seen them fall before. Broken bones you have built it, but it crumbles board by board.
Loving war, then what the hell is loving even for? Sing it loud enough, we'll keep on adding voices up.
Ring the bells, ring the bells, ring the bells, ring the bells, ring the bells. This time I mean it. Bid the hatred fare thee well. Give back the pieces of my Jesus. Take your counterfeit to hell.
All right, guys. As we go into this next song, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that there's been a lot of times in my life where I'm just like, I have no idea what's going on here. I don't know what's happening. Right now is one of those times. There's a lot of craziness going on. But one of the things that I can really stand strong in is the fact that I know that God is right there. This next time we're talking about is like when I least expect it, never behind. You're coming at that right time. When I look at this group of people that I'm up here with, several of us have been in churches together before, and God has placed us in each other's lives in different parts along the way. And then we come into this space here to form this community, and this community that I know I personally could not live without. And I see your faces out there and these people that mean so much to me, and I know that God has brought us here in this time of uncertainty, in this time when everything seems crazy, to be here for each other, to support each other, even when everything else seems crazy, because He is there and has brought us here for this time.
Amen to that. You come at the right time, when I least expect it, never behind. So why would I be surprised when you deliver every time? Sing it out. On mountain tops, you stay the same, and valleys low, you never change. And I believe that I will see the goodness of the Lord I'm confident as seasons change, your faithfulness remains. You go before me to prepare a blessing, to make a way. It's more than I could imagine, more than I could fathom or comprehend. On mountain tops, you stay the same. In valleys low, you never changed. And I believe that I will see the goodness of the Lord. I'm confident as seasons change, your faithfulness God of my present, sing it out. God of my future, you write my story. You hold it all together, sing it out. God of my present, God of my future, you write my story. You write it, you hold it all together. God of my present, one more time, guys, and I want you to sing that out. Declare it over your life. Declare it over each other that He has us, right? God of my present, God of my future, you write my story. You hold it all together. God of my present, God of my future. Sometimes I fall apart. You write my story, but you hold it all together. Amen. All right, guys. Now it is time. Sorry for the introverts in the room. It is time to shake hands and kiss babies, give each other high fives, give each other some love, and enjoy this community.
Well, good morning. Good morning. Thank you for being here this morning. My name is Matt, and if I haven't had the chance to meet you, I'm the lead pastor here at Watershed. Thank you for braving one more gust of cold air to get here this morning, right? Hopefully this is the last Sunday it's going to be that way, although we usually get juked a couple of times in March. Couple of things, just if you're brand new with us, one of the things that's really helpful for us, if you feel comfortable doing so, is filling out an online connection card. There's a few different questions that you can process, and kind of helps us know how you found us here, some things you might be interested in participating in, and that's always really helpful on our end, and would invite you to do so this morning. Also, there's a couple of things coming down the pike here in the next, 2 or 3 weeks that, again, whether you're new or if you're looking to connect in here in some new ways, are environments or opportunities that might be helpful or formative for you. One of those is something called ICU Talks, the Stories We Carry Workshop, March 15th. So if you've been around for a while, you know that the work of Kim Honeycutt and ICU Talks has been in partnership with Watershed over the last few years. And quarterly, they've always done some sort of an event that helps folks begin to have really healthy, vibrant conversations around mental health, destigmatizing mental health in religious spaces, and then just helping people move the needle in their own life. And so this particular event is it's dialogue driven. It's a smaller gathering, but it's got a few folks that are going to share a little bit of their story. And really the thematic thread that runs through it is, what does it mean to not only talk about your story, but then also what does it mean to listen to the stories of others? And so there's a very healthy kind of organic way that this all plays out. It's $15 for that experience. If you can't float the $15, Kim wanted me to make sure everyone knew that don't let that keep you from coming. That's just something that's in place to kind of help help cover some of the cost of the event. Also, we're trying something different. Haven't done this. Maybe we've done this one other time in the last 20 years at Watershed, but we're kind of mashing up preface and reclamation over the course of 2 weeks instead of 4. So preface is our sort of onboarding experience. It's this experience that's very dialogue driven that I've been privileged to lead over the last 10 years. And it kind of says, all right, here's the story of Watershed, and here's some of the metaphors that have helped us go from where we used to be to who we are. And then what's your story, and how does that not just integrate into Watershed, but actually can start to inform who we are. And so preface is usually 4 weeks long. It's 4 sessions, but we're going to try to condense that into 2 weeks, starting on a Sunday, then a Tuesday, then another Sunday, and then another Tuesday. Simultaneous to that happening in this space, David Roberts is doing his next reclamation, which is entitled Reclamation Cosmos. I don't know why that's a 2-syllable word for me this morning, cosmos. But cosmos, it's still a 2-syllable word even when I don't say it that way. Just making stuff up as I go this morning. But it's all things creation and evolution and the theological implications of that, maybe even some of the social, political implications of that. It's going to be a lot of fun. And so I'm telling you this because if you drive at least a respectable distance, respectable meaning like a long way. If you're like coming here anyway on a Sunday morning and you're going, man, I wish there was something for me. Well, there is. And if you're interested in doing preface and the drive is a little tough during the week, we're trying to lower the bar on that just a little bit so that you can take advantage of already being here on those Sundays. There's ways to sign up through the QR code. It always takes you to a landing page that has all of the different opportunities. And I think last check, we had about 17 people signed up for preface. I'd love to get that in the north of the 20 mark. Should be a lot of fun, and I hope you're willing to jump in there. And then lastly, last November, we spent quite a bit of time talking about what it looks like for us to close out the year financially, and then what it's going to need to look like moving into the first quarter of the year. And I wanted to take just a minute and kind of give you an update. Usually at the end of the quarter, we kind of look back and go, okay, what happened that first quarter? But there's actually some preliminary information that I thought might be helpful to share. When you give here, this is always something that's I think helpful, important to be reminded, but there's a reason that resources have a particular or serve a particular function here. And so I just wanted to remind you that when you give, those resources stand in solidarity with our marginalized neighbors. They pave the way for healing, awakening, and hope for your Watershed community and your Watershed neighbors. When you give here, if you go back to the other slide, I'm literally reading from the slide. Thank you. When you give here, you invest in generations of students and children. Our kids in Greenhouse are hopefully growing up free from some of the things that we are now trying to escape. And so that means something here in this space. Giving is about partnering and stewarding in the gift of this physical space and what we're afforded here in this city. I know I sound like a broken record, but it's just so amazing. When you drive through this parking lot on a Wednesday night or a Friday night or a Saturday morning, it's packed. It looks like we're having church on other days of the week because there's such a robust recovery community and other work happening here. We're to the point now where people are constantly calling us going, we hear your space is a place of grace and generosity, and we're starting to have to say, I'm sorry, we're just full right now. That is worth your resources. Transformation is happening while you're not even here. That's important. And then lastly, when you give, you participate in and you fuel a form of resistance in a world where some believe in the expulsion or erasure of others. I don't think there hasn't been a time in history when it's so prolifically in the face of our country and our world where some people, because they might be different and because they're being othered, there's a movement or there's this base note of we just need to get rid of those people. And so places like Watershed are flies in the ointment of that toxic thinking. And for that in and of itself, just existing is a form of resistance in an unjust world. We have a lot to figure out here, but I was telling my daughter last night, I said, 20 years into this is more meaningful and more significant than I ever dreamed it would be, and for reasons I never could have imagined when we got started. And so when you give, those are the sorts of things that are being animated. Now let me tell you where we land real quick in the short term, these first 2 months. Our annual budget that we passed last year through our lead team was to say if we could have $49,000, this would allow us per month, that would allow us to hire the staff we need to hire, to have the programs we need to have, to make sure things are functional and healthy, at least for 2025. Our income does not match our budget. And that's been the case for the last 3 or 4 years. The crawl out of the pandemic and the decimation of most churches because of what had happened with the pandemic and some of the political things that have gone on has been slow, but it's been steady. And so there's good news to report after 2 months in February. The first thing is we are living way below our budget. Our average expenses are $44,000 right now compared to what we have budgeted at $49,000. Our staff is committed to living way below our budget in hopes that our means come up, our income starts to rise. When I stood up in November and told you guys, all right, we're at least $4,000 off from where we need to be by June, well, we've made some progress. We're down to $2,400 now. If we can close the gap between what we're already spending, so we're bleeding a little bit each month. We're having to dip into our reserves just to make it work, but we're not dipping into the tune of $7,000 or $8,000 a month. We're dipping into the tune of about $2,400. That is achievable over the next several months, and we need it to happen sooner than later because we've got some things that we want to do. We got some staff that we desperately need to hire, and part of making that decision in a way that is healthy and sustainable, that number becomes super important. So if you've just shown up over the last 2 or 3 months and you're going, all right, when do I jump in? There could never be a better time to jump in. And I want to make sure that you heard that from me this morning. I'll talk more about this maybe 3 or 4 weeks down the road. There's a real simple way to give here. If you go to the QR code, real secure ways of doing that. If you work for big organizations like Bank of America or Wells Fargo, there's actually matching programs. I think it's B of A matches up to $5,000 of annual giving. So that's a lot of opportunity for some of you who work in those spaces. And that's not the only spaces that do matching programs. You can reach out to me or David or one of our staff if you're more curious about that. And then lastly this morning, we are in week, I believe it's week 3, is that right? Week 3 of a mini-series during our host segment called Meet Your Lead Team Member. Will you give it up for Elizabeth Watson this morning? Come on over here, Elizabeth. So Elizabeth has, she's one of 5 total lead team members. Is that right? No, 6. 6 total. I'm the 6th, so there's 5 of you and there's 1 of me. It takes 5 people to keep me in check is what that looks like. But I know you've been around for a while, but could you just take a moment and help us get to know you? Who is Elizabeth Watson to Elizabeth Watson?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Watson. I have been a part of Watershed since about 2012. I grew up in Fort Mill, South Carolina, and now I live in West Charlotte in Enderley Park with my husband, DeAndre. And our 4-year-old daughter, Zora. And professionally, I work in healthcare innovation.
All right. This is going to be fun. So we ask the same 3 questions of every lead team member. What, having been here for as long as you've been, what is Watershed to you?
Thanks for asking that. Watershed to me is a place where I can come and be myself, and it's where I get to be in community with people who are also invited to bring their full selves into a church space. When I was sort of looking for a church after grad school, I had a friend, Katie Williams, who got one of the postcards that Watershed would send out, and she thought I might be interested, so I did a little Googling, and it was one of the few churches that actually had justice on the website. And at the time and today, I was not interested in being part of a church that wasn't thinking through that lens. And so what justice means has evolved for us, and the language that we use to talk about the world has evolved, but I'm still really proud to be part of a church that is very inclusive and where we're inviting people to think and grow together.
Yeah, you've been through just about every iteration of who we've been, and one of the things that is really amazing about Elizabeth, and one of the reasons I was excited that she was going to join the lead team, is for the past 15 years, she's not just invested her personal time and energy and resources. She's led blocks. There was a few years there where you were like leading blocks prolifically in this community. And then for a while, she was the person that oversaw our entire hospitality experience. I don't know, 4 locations ago or something like that when we were over at Center Stage. And so when you and I sat down and the invitation was offered to be on the lead team, can you talk about why you said yes?
So I trusted that Matt knew me and knew the experience and the talents that I had, and felt like it would be a good fit for the lead team. And sometimes I look around the lead team and I'm like, wow, this is a bright group of people. What am I doing here? But I think that part of my professional expertise that I bring is looking at systems and making sure that it works for the people in the systems. And I think, what is community except the people? And so getting to look at the budget through the lens of our folks here on Sundays, our volunteers, and our amazing staff is something that I enjoy doing, and that hopefully I bring something to on the lead team.
You certainly do. Would you give Elizabeth a round of applause? Thank you. Thank you guys again for your patience this morning, and have a great day.
Thoughts down on a page, half asleep, I'll make a list and meet back all my greatest hits. Should meditate, should work out more, Should read until my brain gets sore. Meet someone, go far away. Try being socially less strange. It's how a diamond grows, yeah. Give yourself the right chance over time. Don't believe them if they try to sell you something quicker. Cut off these half of my friends. No one noticed or mentioned. I thought I'd last, I'd breathe easy. But then I thought a lot of things. Hey new year, hey new you. You left so much low-hanging fruit. You're in the ring for the title fight, with only montage training time. That's how a diamond grows, yeah. Give yourself the right chance over time. Don't believe them if they try to sell you something quicker. That's how a diamond grows, yeah. Reach as far as you can, then hold tight. Don't believe them if they try to sell you something different. They say a diamond grows with time. Oh, I believe it, 'cause I've seen it with my eyes. Well, there's a guaranteed parade of broken promises. Did you accept some kind of miracle? You do what you can do, that's all. Oh, oh. That's what a diamond grows, yeah. Give yourself the right chance over time. Don't believe them if they try to sell you something quicker. That's how a diamond grows with time. Don't believe them if they try to sell you something quicker.
Good morning. All right. My name's David. I'm one of the pastors here at Watershed, and lovely. So I didn't know how I was going to start this morning. I had a few ideas I was mulling around, but too late to add it to the slides. I found, I was just scrolling through Instagram stories, sort of mindlessly, as one does, and I found this. This is a quote from a guy named Adam Phillips. He's a professor, probably. I've heard of him. He's written books. I think he lives in Chicago. But the quote was good. I'm going to share it with you. It's not going to be on the screen. You can hit me up after if you want it. We're going to start with this, all right? I feel like we're off to a great start. Goes like this. He says, "The myth of our potential can make our lives a perpetual falling short." All right. Looks like I picked a good quote. You all kind of murmured. All right, I'm going to start again. The myth of our potential can make of our lives a perpetual falling short, a continual and continuing loss, a sustained and sometimes sustaining rage. The myth of potential makes our mornings like when we mourn, not like the morning, like in daytime. The myth of potential makes our mornings and complaining feel like the realest things that we ever do, and makes of our frustration a secret life of grudges. Even if we set aside the inevitable questions, how would we know if we had realized our potential? Where did we get our picture of this potential from? If we don't have potential, what do we have? We can't imagine our lives without the unlived lives they contain. We have an abiding sense, however obscure and obscured, that the lives we do lead are informed by the lives that escape us. That our lives are defined by loss, but loss of what might have been. Loss, that is, of things never experienced. I thought it was a good quote. A little heavy, a little heady, but that's me. And so I wanted to open with that because this series, Commune, that we're in, the roots of togetherness, we are kind of wrestling with and exploring what does it mean to be community? What does it mean to form and to sustain community? For reasons that I don't think I need to rehearse this morning, I think that probably for many of us feels really pressing, really important right now to have folks who we can connect with, who we can commune with, folks who we perhaps have something in common with. And so a little bit kind of on the surface, this series is about making that accessible, making that practical. Matt kicked off and he talked a lot about some of the history of what that has looked like at Watershed and shared some stories about how that has been an important and sustaining thing, not just for sort of the kind of like macro level of the organization that is Watershed, but at the micro level of individual lives that either have been changed or continue to be changed by being in community in a place like Watershed. And then last week, Kim Honeycutt, who's not in here to cheer for herself, so you can do that for her, talked about some of the hang-ups and some of the things that can get in the way of authentic community, and in her usual brilliance did that. And so what I want to do today is, I will admit that it is, how do I put this? I might be speaking for myself as opposed to speaking for the entirety of the teaching team or the entirety of Watershed, but I'm going to be getting into sort of definitions of community that, at least for me, resonates and are meaningful, and they kind of track with that quote from Adam Phillips that I opened with. But before I get to that, a parable. And I've told this parable before, and it's not one of Jesus' parables. You've heard those plenty, I hope. But this is a parable that I don't think originated with a guy named Pete Rollins, but he's who I heard it from. That's going to be true of a parable that I kind of close the morning with, so much to look forward to. But and I'm going to use Pete's character names. Pete's from Northern Ireland, and his accent is cooler than mine. And he always uses the same main character for his stories, his parables. It's a Irish guy named Seamus. And so Seamus isn't a real person, I don't think. Sorry, Pete, if he is. Or sorry, Seamus, I guess. But that's just who he is. Don't worry about who Seamus is. But parable goes like this. There's a competition. It's probably taking place somewhere where there's lots of sheep, because the competition is about who can build in 1 hour's time the biggest and best sheep pen, place where you pen in the sheep. So there are 3 entrants to the competition. The first we'll name Carl. Not for any particular reason, don't read into that. It's just the first name that came to my head. And in an hour's time, Carl builds a sheep pen that can hold 50 sheep, which, as far as I know, is a very, very impressive pen. So the judges come and they look at his pen and they inspect its integrity. It looks good. And they say, okay, good job, Carl. And they move on to the second person in the sheep pen. We'll say Diana, because building sheep pens is not just man's work. And again, don't read into the name. It's just the first name that came into my head. But Diana, in her just engineering ingenuity, managed to, in 1 hour's time, build a sheep pen that fits 100 sheep. Yeah, exactly. Snaps for Diana. And so they're very impressed. And of course, Carl's now feeling a little sheepish. But yeah, there we go. See the energy in the room? Yeah, it's good. Awful. Well played. I think most of you missed exactly how funny that was. Anyway, and then we got to Seamus. And Seamus spent most of his hour kind of, hanging around, twiddling his thumbs. And then with about 10, 15 minutes left in the hour-long kind of competition, he quickly grabbed a few just pieces of wood, and he built a small pen around himself, and then just kind of stood there in it. And so when the judges came, they kind of walked around, and he's just kind of standing there, and they're looking around, and they're like, Seamus, I think you may have misunderstood the assignment. You can only fit, at best, one small sheep in here. And Seamus, and I can't do the accent, so I'm not even going to try, he says, oh, no, you misunderstand. You're in the pen. I'm not. Everything else, everything that is outside is in the pen. And I like this parable because it tracks with what is, for me, at least in my limited time on this earth, the best attempt, the best prospect, we could say, for the largest, most universal form of community. Because I think we know this, at least intuitively on some level. Generally speaking, communities are formed around things that we have in common. Yeah, exactly. Hence the word. And we talk about this a lot. It could be common interests. I subscribe to a number of Reddit pages that are communities formed of people who share some of my interests. There's entire conventions where people dress up in cool ways, around common interests. There's a lot of you wearing Charlotte FC attire this morning. There's a community. So community can be having some sort of affinity in common. There's communities formed around shared identities. And then, of course, the most common form of community, the most prevalent, and I think the one most driving our world today, is community formed around a common enemy. Someone who we want to other and at times eliminate. And it's my conviction that ultimately, despite our best efforts, all community, at least in the most basic form, sort of lives or dies on the same kind of basic premise, which is we understand who's in on the basis of differentiating those people from those who are on the outside. So even the communities who are maybe not hostile to those on the outside, perhaps you're a community formed around, and that's a bad example. I won't give you a specific example because all of them fall apart for precisely the reasons that I'm trying to illustrate this morning. Is at the end of the day, for who's in to make sense, there has to be a who's out. Otherwise, there's no way to identify the people who are in, right? And again, on some level, this is inevitable, and I don't want to demonize it. And on some level, it's natural. I'm going to enjoy spending time with people who are excited about a lot of the same things as me. And yes, it can be sometimes fun to learn about someone who's into something different. And maybe I might adopt this new thing that I learn about into part of my personal repertoire of personalities or whatever. And then I establish new community. But sometimes we run into something that, oh, yucky, I don't like that thing. And hopefully, usually it's a mundane thing like a TV show or a rival sports team or something like that. But sometimes it's something much more defining about our experience of the world, and so we develop buffers and barriers to separate ourselves from that thing. And so, getting back to the parable, and this sort of gets into at least some of the things that Watershed has experimented with when it comes to how we understand community over the years is there's something intriguing to me about a community not of collective belonging, because I think sometimes we run up into the natural limits of what does it mean to belong, but maybe a sense of collective or universal non-belonging, where on some level the one thing that all of us have in common, every single one of us, despite the different ways that the things that we do have in common maybe run into inevitable roadblocks and obstacles and contradictions and things like that, the one thing that we all have in common on some level is, at the root of it, we at least feel as if more often than not, we don't belong. And if you don't think that's true of yourself, then think back to how many times you've maybe invoked cliches like imposter syndrome. If you've ever experienced imposter syndrome, then you're getting at exactly what that's getting at exactly what I'm talking about. You know, walking into a place and feeling as if, oh, despite how it may look, despite how people might be treating me in hopefully in a good way in this moment, there's something that feels just a little off. Like, you know, if you just pull that thread just a little too quickly, the whole thing's going to unravel. And so that collective non-belonging, the opportunity to sort of orient around our shared notness, is something that I think has a ton of, I guess, practical potential when it comes to the art of togetherness, or the roots of togetherness that we're exploring in this series. And we have a word for it at Watershed. You all took, or many of you who were here, took communion last week when Kim led. And communion is actually what we call what I'm talking about. I'm going to read this for you. It's on our website, hidden deeply in the confines. I think it's like 3 clicks in, which immediately makes it useless from an SEO term. So you may never find it, but I brought it here. For your reading pleasure this morning. I'll read it out loud. You can read it in your head. So we choose the word communion instead of, or rather to modify perhaps, community, in order to note the inherently binary or dualistic nature of community. And that's kind of what I was just talking about. That even with the best of intentions, you know, oftentimes our sense of inness, our sense of belonging, is either consciously or unconsciously predicated on the outness of some other who doesn't fit that. It's dualistic, or it's binary. Whereas a community is a grouping around a shared presence, a communion is a grouping around a shared absence. Why do we call Eucharist, you know, taking of the bread and the wine, why do we call that communion? Because we are orienting or organizing around the shared absence of the body of Christ. We're providing a substitute, and I'm going to get into sort of the narrative of that in a moment. Could you put the definition back up there real quick? Communion, however, is a grouping around a shared absence. Communion is a dialectical, holistic. It allows for genuine collectivity. It creates a sense of what I said a moment ago, a universal non-belonging that unites us and helps us see our common humanity. And it goes back to that quote I shared at the beginning, the idea that in all of our lives, there's this, you know, who we are, and is in many ways built upon or predicated on or kind of generated by or kind of springs forth from these questions, regrets even, about, you know, who we're not, or maybe what we could have been, or the, you know, the road not taken, and we have this oftentimes, I think, commodified or consumeristic approach to what does it mean to be in community, where if we can just find the right thing, the right presence, that could be an object that we identify with. That could be the presence of people with whom we identify. If we can just find the right thing, then that'll sort of like square the circle. It'll sort of close the loop. It'll make us whole in a sense of kind of like finite completeness. And if you've ever experienced buyer's remorse, then I think you know that ultimately that's a fleeting or kind of futile endeavor to try to find the thing. Then it doesn't mean those things that we're pursuing, those relationships, those communities, those identities, it doesn't mean any of those things are inherently bad. But there is something ultimately, it's as if you're kind of approaching a limit. You can never, ever quite kind of get over that final hump to the sort of wholeness or completeness that you're seeking. It's a byproduct of the way that we, in our culture, we commodify and turn everything into a consumable. And so, sort of within the Christian tradition, within the biblical tradition, at least for me, you've probably heard me talk from time to time about the fact that the Bible doesn't work the way, at least that I was sort of kind of shown growing up, that it's this one big sort of like harmonious, perfect story, and it all kind of like comes together, you know, in sort of this linear fashion from kind of beginning to end. Like that always bothered me as a kid, because I'm kind of like, if this document that we have here if this is supposed to be like the, you know, God's word pretty much literally dictated to humans almost like text message style, or like, I don't know, like almost like I don't know if anyone else thought this, like I would imagine like God or the Holy Spirit or something would like possess someone, and then, you know, so, you know, they're just like, I'm left-handed, they probably would have been right-handed, but, you know, they're just, you know, writing down just vigorously on their scroll or whatever. and then I would see the Bible. Like I've been in church my entire life, and I'm like, this is a mess. It's all over the place. It's boring. Wildly boring at crucial points. And a lot of the characters are bad. And you can define bad in different ways. A lot of the characters are like bad people, like not admirable. And a lot of the other ones they're not well developed. They're very flat cliches of characters. And so this is a bit of a tangent, but as I've entered into a season of my journey, and specifically into a place like Watershed, a community like Watershed, where I'm able to sort of creatively and provocatively sort of reimagine and explore different ways of understanding the relationship to the biblical text. The Bible, even though it is, it's much less on the kind of sort of like divine pedestal that it once was, it's actually much more alive to me as a document, as a dialogue partner, as a site for exploration of what does it mean to know God, far more than it ever was at one of those kind of earlier, more sort of sterile expectations that I had for it in my life. And so, long sort of preface to get into, there is a sort of sequence of passages in the Bible that for me it's kind of become sort of like, this is not the official Watershed position, I'm speaking for David right now, but it's sort of emerged as sort of like a canon within the canon for me. And precisely because it illustrates this notion of community that I find really, really compelling. That was, talked about with that definition of communion a moment ago. And I'm going to breeze through it. It's not going to be on the screen. I'm just going to kind of describe it to you, so don't worry too much about it. But it starts in Genesis, of course. In Genesis chapter 3, the fall of humanity. But what's meaningful about this passage to me is the sort of sleight of hand that the serpent, not Satan, never says it's Satan, the serpent, the snake, sort of tricks Adam and Eve with by so you have this group of people, this pair of people who have already, according to the text, if we're just taking the text at its word, are already declared to be made in the image of God. And then the serpent is over here promising them something. What is the serpent promising? The serpent is promising that they can be like God. But they're already like God. It already said that. So the serpent is offering something that ostensibly they already have. But the way that the serpent promises that they can achieve it is not simply by the mere fact of their existence. It's coming over here, knowing good and evil. It's being able to then divide the world based on in and out, right and wrong, pure and impure. And so the twist or the trick is to say, oh no, you are already sort of in and of yourself sort of inherently divine. And the serpent is like, whoa, no, you are not that. And in order to achieve that, you need to order the world properly. And they buy it. Now, I don't think that story actually really ever happened, but hopefully that's not too shocking. But crucially, I think it's true. It's true. It is a true reflection of the way that we experience what it means to be human. We are constantly pursuing what it means to be in, what it means to be right, what it means to be pure, what it means to be on the good winning team, so to speak. We've built our entire society and economic system around it. And it goes all the way back to the beginning. It's the most like fundamental sort of inherent human thing. So I start in Genesis 3, and then I skip a lot. A lot. And there's some good stuff in there. It's fun. Lots of stuff that we've turned into Bible stories. Some of them are really relevant this week. I've been singing the bunny song a lot, if you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, go watch some VeggieTales. Or read the book of Daniel. But then I fast forward to the Gospels. That's key, right? The stories of Jesus. And the particular part about the Gospels that are really meaningful to me is the passion narratives, the crucifixion and resurrection stories. You know that I love the book of Mark a lot. We'll talk about that again in a few weeks. But I love the weirdness of the resurrection narratives because they don't harmonize very cleanly. Mark, there's not even a resurrected Jesus. There's just this random kid in the tomb who's saying cryptic weird things. Then in Matthew, you get, he's the gardener, and in Luke, you get some people who walk like miles with him before even realizing who he was. He's a ghost in John. It's awesome. It's wildly inconsistent. And I think that's a feature, not a bug, of the narrative. And so I take this idea that the risen Jesus cannot be objectified, cannot be commodified, cannot be identified with in a way that could be grasped in the way that we are trying to grasp, okay, if I can just get this thing, I'll be in, I'll be right, I'll be good. It kind of harkens back to John 3 when he's talking to Nicodemus, and Nicodemus is basically wanting to know, how do I secure my identity? How do I secure my place in this world? Thinking that as a Jewish person, as someone who is born right, that he be good. And Jesus completely upends that by saying you have to be born again. Yeah, that would have been radically wild and borderline offensive to someone like Nicodemus. And Jesus talks about being born of water and spirit. These are chaos elements in the Jewish history. Jesus is basically saying, no, you have to undo all of that. The ground of your being is actually this groundless ground, and it's wild. That's sort of like in there in these resurrection narratives. And then you get to, and then the disciples sort of like endure that. And then they end up on the Mount of Olives, and they're like, all right, cool. Like, Jesus is back, and he's got superpowers now, and like, we're gonna conquer the Romans. And Jesus is literally like, ugh. And then he Irish goodbyes. He's just gone. Ninja bells. And they're just staring up into space, and these angels come down, and they're like, what are you doing? He told you this was going to happen. Like, why are you still doing this? And then they're all freaking out. They don't know what to do. And then the Holy Spirit comes and everything's awesome. And I kind of glossed over a few things there. So again, remember, there is no objectifiable body of Christ. There is no Christ who they can make king. There is no community that they can form with them being in. There is nothing to orient around in like a victory formation. When the resurrected body of Christ, which exhibited this sort of bizarre sort of continuity, the scars, but then radical discontinuity, no one could recognize him. That wasn't enough. It still wasn't working. So Jesus is like, fine, I'm just going to take the body away. We're just going to go. And then in replacement of that, they get not a body, but a spirit. A ghost, a haunting. What is a haunting if not a present absence, or an absence that is deeply present? And so there's this idea that there's a negativity, there's a void, there's a negation, there is a not at oneness that they're able to orient around. And this is what the entire book of Acts is then based on. And then fast forward, you get to this Paul guy. He's okay, but what I love, and I like Paul. I like Paul. Progressive Christians redeeming Paul. But I'm not being sarcastic. He's great. But what I most like about Paul, these multiple instances in Romans and Galatians and in 1 Corinthians where he talks about to live as Christ and to die as gain, or I am crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives with me. Or I desire to know nothing but Christ and him crucified. And what I take away from this is this idea that for Paul, to identify with Christ is not to identify with inness, but with outness. And what is revealed in the person of Christ. And I have a very apocalyptic, which means revelation, a very apocalyptic notion of salvation at this stage in my spiritual journey. What is revealed in the person of Christ, what is revealed as always already true, is a kind of innateness to our divinity, a kind of innateness to our image bearingness. It's not a transactional thing where there's a before and an after, and like before we suck, and then after we pray this weird prayer and then we're good again. It's not like there's like God needed the blood of Christ in some sort of like weird Castlevania sort of way. It's more that what is revealed in the broken body of Jesus is something that has always already been true about us, but then also always already true about the solidarity that we experience with God. That there is this outness to being that if we view it as something to be overcome, we wear it like a burden. But if we see it as something that's always already been true about, as something beautiful, maybe even the very ground of our divine spark, the creativeness, the creativity that lives within us, then it completely sort of reorients and reforms what it could be for us. And I know this is all very abstract. Thank you for indulging me. But when I think about how this might manifest practically, I think about, well, I showed you the communion slide. We have these 4 C's at Watershed. I'm going to breeze through 2 of them. One of them, the second one I'm going to breeze through is contradiction. Perhaps my favorite word in the English language. Tarrying with contradiction forces us to resist the temptation of assigning victory conditions to our world, reducing its contradictions to oppositions. That's the key part. That's the serpent lie. We experience these contradictions. We don't fit cleanly into our communities. We don't fit cleanly into our identities. If you've ever had those, and I might find out that something is very unique about me in just a moment, depending on your reaction, but if you've ever had the experience where all of a sudden you realize that the person who you were, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago, I'm trying to cast a broad net because there's a diversity of ages in the room, you kind of have this weird sort of I know that was me. I can remember being that, but I could just as easily be convinced that I sprang into existence 30 seconds ago. There's this, again, just like with the resurrected body of Jesus, there's this radical continuity and discontinuity even within our own identity, even within our own experience of ourselves. We're never exactly identical with who we understand ourselves to be. And it's the attempt to overcome these contradictions, to turn them into opposition, something to be defeated, something to be completed, something to be transactionally sort of transgressed or something like that. That's what turns it into something anxiety-inducing. But if there's a way to sort of flip the posture towards it, flip the relationship towards it, we can begin seeing these things in our life not as things to acquire, things to overcome, things to defeat, but things to be, the word we use here is tarried with, explored, held in tension. You hear us talking about both and a lot. This gets a little bit at what we're talking about. It's not an either or. There's not a before and after, but there's sort of the both and of sort of taking up and including that thing in us. I mentioned wholeness earlier, and I have a weird relationship with the word wholeness. Everyone at Watershed loves the word wholeness. You all want to be so whole, which is great, but I think wholeness could be understood in 2 different ways. And I'm more kind, I guess, to the second one. This first one is kind of getting back to the lie of the serpent, which is if you can just fill in the blank, you will be whole, or you will be like God. If you can just, and then you could go through the list for yourself, whatever that looks like, whatever the thing is that consciously or unconsciously you're if I could just, bleh. And the worst thing that could possibly happen to you is for you to get that thing. Because if you got the thing, you would realize it does not make you whole. And God forbid that thing be a person who is now suddenly very disappointing to you, or a job. Here's the thing, it's usually a good thing. But when it's made an ultimate thing, we call that idolatry, But no, you get it. And oftentimes we realize that sort of there's this resentment or disappointment in some of these things. But I think there's another way, there's a better way to understanding wholeness. Richard Rohr talks about transcending and including, taking up and sort of orienting around kind of this, taking the good with the bad would be a way to frame it or to phrase it. It would be to be whole. Maybe in a therapeutic or counseling context, you've heard there's a book called No Bad Parts, for example. And sort of taking up these things that maybe we want to repress or disavow or kind of move on from and say, no, that's part of it too. There's a holistic, sort of taking up into who we are. That gets to the third of the 4 C's. It's the one that doesn't fit as cleanly and poetically in the others, but it's a messy word by definition. It's the word compost, which illustrates our convictions that borders or border spaces are generative. Things like death and failure and endings generate and produce conditions for new possibilities. Resurrection goes through death and out the other side, never around. As a famous poem once said, every new beginning is some other beginning end. Semisonic. Not Third Eye Blind, despite what LimeWire told you years ago. No, but this idea that something can come from nothing, that failure is actually the very site of possibility, How many of you, you can mentally raise your hand or physically raise your hand? I don't care. I can't really see you all that well anyway. But many of us maybe grew up in a context where, when we heard the creation narrative in Genesis, it was all about God creating something from nothing. And then, I don't know if you're like me, but I remember being, I'm an image bearer of God. And then I would try to create matter from nothing. Unsuccessfully, I might add, if that wasn't obvious. But I think that maybe misunderstands it. I think that maybe misunderstands it because creation is not just about creating matter. It's about creating meaning for that matter. Creation is about making your matter matter. And that is something that we actually do. And in fact, I think that creative act that we participate in is precisely making something from nothing. Because there is a nothingness in us, and there's a kind of contradiction. There's even a kind of failure that is not, that is constitutive of who we are as people and as humans, as beings, as image bearers. And rather than seeing it as something to be overcome, like the serpent, but if we actually see it almost as sort of like a reflection of the infinite possibilities within us. I somewhat jokingly, but not jokingly, I said this to someone on a podcast a while back. I said, this is going to sound really pretentious, but I said, I consider myself a disciple of possibility. And I said it in that voice, that kind of like Batman voice. But what I meant by that is this idea that failure and possibility are two sides of the same coin. That on some level, and this gets to that idea of resurrection goes through death and out the other side. The resurrection of Jesus was not a rewind. It was not a kind of taking a step back and over to the side and then going forward again, but it was a complete sort of, good job, that's exactly when I wanted you to come out. Well done. It's always a dance with me. But no, it is taking up and including the death, and whatever comes out the other side has to take up and sort of include that. And so when we think about community, when I think about community, it has to include this communion element, this idea that ultimately the stickiest thing is the sort of the absence, the lack, the nothingness that we share. Very encouraging stuff. But this idea of contradictions are not something that we need to overcome or reduce to oppositions, but something that we explore, that we tarry with, that we maybe even commune around. This idea of composting, that these failures are actually generative. They produce something new to be tarried. New contradictions, perhaps, but something to be leaned into. Which leads us then to our final one, our final C, probably the most foundational C of all, which is curiosity. We often contrast in a very un-Watershedian either-or sort of way, curiosity with certainty. I think the biggest disappointment people have with Watershed is our just abject refusal to give you certainty in any area of your life. But it's not accidental. Curiosity names the provisionality of our interpretive lens. There's a humility to that, we think, our understanding of the world. We know that our perspective is always contextual. It's always influenced by our experiences, our education, our identity, all those things. A posture of curiosity demands that we assume from the outset that there's always more to see, be it in others, the biblical text, God, or the world. We just think that's a better way. And so, if you wanted like a big kind of overarching summary of like what I was trying to accomplish this morning, I think what I was trying to accomplish is to offer a lens. Because we're inviting you into community, not just in the upcoming weeks as we're kind of pushing these blocks and we're launching these affinity groups and we're trying to re-engineer and kind of reimagine what does it look like to be together. And I know that level of togetherness, that invitation is going to come with certain expectations, some of them spoken, some of them unspoken. And so I kind of want to preemptively warn, invite, I don't know, but give you a lens that as you experience contradictions, as you run into moments of failure, loss, to not see those as something that, as evidence that you screwed up, not see those as moments of undoing whatever process or progress you're on. I said this earlier, it's another thing that we see often here. It's a feature, not a bug, of what does it mean, or what it means to be together. I'll close with another parable that I think illustrates what I'm about to say. It's this idea that if you can be disappointed, that means you can imagine that things could be otherwise. And if you can imagine that things that could be otherwise, then there's possibility there. There's possibility that you could actualize that otherwise. And it's not going to go the way you think. It's not going to go perfectly. And it's very similar to this parable. I also stole this from Pete Rollins, but he did not originate this one. I think this is a ancient Chinese parable, but it goes something like this. There was a man who had a horse. And one day that horse broke out. And so the man could no longer do his farming or whatever he used the horse for. And his neighbors came over and said, "Oh, this is terrible. This must mean that the gods are against you." And he said, maybe. And then a few days later, the horse came back and it brought with it a bunch of wild horses. So this guy, he'd gone from one horse to now he had like 6 horses. And then his neighbors came back and was like, "This is great. This is amazing. This must be evidence that the gods really love you." And he said, maybe. And then a few days later, his son went and was trying to sort of break in one of the horses. And in the process, the horse kind of trampled him and it broke his leg. And so he wasn't able to help anymore. And he was going to be okay, but it was maybe going to be some lasting effects of that injury. And then again, the neighbors came and they said, "Oh, this is tragic. This is horrible. This is the worst thing ever. The gods must hate you." And he said, maybe. And then the nation went to war. And the conscriptors came around, and when they came to take his son, to draft him into the army, he wasn't able to help because he was crippled from his injury. And so his son was spared being brought into this conflict. And then again, the neighbors came around and they said, "Oh, this is so amazing. The gods must love you." And again, the man said, maybe. When we have these expectations that this is what victory conditions look like, this is what success looks like. It could be in community, could be in vocation, could be in relationship. When we have this sort of commodified approach to our lives, then it's always going to be an either or. But when we're able to relate to these experiences with a posture of curiosity, when the things hit us, good or bad, if what we're saying to them is sort of we're letting these things wash over us is maybe, or perhaps, then I think there's a richness in our experiences that's going to be harder to miss. And so that's the invitation that I want to leave you with this morning is as you maybe do something that feels risky, entering into community. Maybe it used to be part of your life and hasn't been lately. Or maybe it's something that you're longing for, but this is a new space. Maybe you're different than you used to be. You're entering into a new understanding of your identity. That could be at really any level of identity. Maybe there's some fear or trepidation. I invite you to lean into that. This isn't going to be a place where you're going to overcome that, but it might be a place where you could begin to relate to that thing a little more productively, a little more meaningfully. Maybe. Grace and peace.
So I want to say something about that, because when David said that the serpent gave them the idea to choose between good and evil, I don't know if any of you know the story of the wolf in the woods. There's the 2 wolves, good wolf, bad wolf. One is everything that's positive and one that's everything that's negative. And the question is which one survives in the wilderness? And the answer is it's the one that you feed, which I lived by for a long time. And I've begun to realize that there's only one wolf. You can put your energy and food and fuel into something that's not there, and you'll see the effects of that, but it doesn't mean that there's something real there to fear. I believe that fear is the concept that anything we can experience is anything less than divine. And when we buy into a fear, we have faith in the idea that anything is less than the image of God. That's when we lose sight of God. And deliverance from my enemies looks a lot like not resting until you find that divinity in them and you speak into that. And yeah, that was like just one of my favorite sermons that I've ever heard, so much of it. So thank you, David.
Yeah. Will you guys stand and sing with us? You unravel me with a melody. You surround me with song of deliverance from my enemies till all my fears are gone. I'm no longer a slave to fear, and I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear, and I am a child of God.
From my mother's womb, you have crafted me. Love has called my name. I've been welcomed in to your family. You love us all the same. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God.
I am surrounded by the arms of the Father, and I am surrounded by songs of deliverance. We've been liberated from our bondage of fear. We're the sons and the daughters. Let us sing of our freedom. Oh, oh, you set the sea so I could walk right through it. You drowned my fears in perfect love. You rescued me so I could stand and sing. I am a child of God. You split the sea so I could walk right through it. You drowned my fears in perfect love.
child of God. Oh, I am a child of God.
Am I back? Yeah. So as we close, I want to thank you for being here this morning, and I want to invite you into a moment of practice and reflection on what I talked about this morning. I want to invite you to commune over the absence of chairs in the middle of the room. And so in order to do that, what we're going to have to do is move them all to the sides of the room, and then you can commune in that void that is created. So if it's not making sense what I'm saying, we need to stack the chairs. So thank you for being here. We will see you next week.